welcome back to my channel. It's Lexi, and today I have a really fun, the ultimate beginner's guide to fantasy video for you. I have put together a list of books that I think are perfect to start your fantasy journey, so let's just get chatting about them. Let's talk about my ultimate guide for fantasy for beginners. The first series I always recommend to anyone telling me they want to get into fantasy is Caraval by Stephanie Garber. Definitely on the young adult side, this is a very easy read. It is very magical and whimsical, and it feels like a carnival in a book. It has magical games, deceit, a sister relationship that is to literally die for. I'm obsessed with the sisters, Donatella and Scarlett. They are one of my favorite sister duos in this whole list. I just think these books are so magical. The first one, we are following Scarlett and Donatella, mostly Scarlett, as she is navigating the game of Caraval. Caraval is a magical game that comes up once a year, hosted by Legend, and they are competing for a prize, which is a wish granted by Legend. And obviously plot twist and turns and things happen, and this is just such a magically genius book. Next, if you loved Caraval, I would recommend you pick up the Once Upon a Broken Heart series, which is also a very good intro into a fantasy book. This is more romance, I would say. The romance in this trilogy is very heavy, but this is a spin-off series about one of the characters in that original trilogy, so I don't want to say too much about what this is about. This one, I would say if you are a huge fan of fairy tales looking to get into fantasy, this is for sure what I would recommend you. This reads just like a fairy tale. So magical, so beautiful. I'm obsessed with the two main characters in this whole series. And if you loved Caraval, you're going to want to pick this up. I do just want to point out, this young adult, the tension for the romance feels a little bit more intense in this series than the Caraval one, but I would still say it's young adult. I also just want to point out the first book and the third book are like higher mid reads. The second one though, The Ballad of Never After, absolutely carries this whole trilogy. It's so good, so magical, so romantic, so whimsical, just so cute. I love these books. Next book I would recommend is the Cruel Prince trilogy by Holly Black. This is also young adult, and what I love about this one is it is a great introductory into the Fae world. Very easy to read. It explains it really well for someone who doesn't understand the rules of Fae. But I will say for this one, you have to be more in a mood for fantasy than romance. This is not very romantically driven, which is what I personally liked about it, but I do understand some people love fantasy or love romance in their books. You're gonna get romance, but it's very back burner and it's very slow burn. So some people say this is boring because of that. It just depends on your preference of reading. If you are not reading for romance, this is a great series. It is so politically intrigue driven. I love that about this book. I personally love political intrigue in a book, so I loved reading about this world's specific politics. But overall, I just loved the series. In this series, we are following a dude who's actually a human, and due to circumstances ends up in the Fae world. I can't remember what it's called off the top of my head, so forgive me, but she ends up in the Fae world, who all hate humans, and she's kind of living there under, I forget who she's living with, basically her dad. It's not really her dad, but basically someone who cares for her as her dad, and it's just about her navigating the world of the Fae as she becomes older and kind of understands the problems the Fae world has politically, and it is just a great read. Again, this is not going to be for you if you're looking for romance though, so I just want to point that out. Next, I would say this one's more closer to new adult than adult or YA. Nine Rivals by Rebecca Ross. This is a completed duology. I would say I would recommend this for people who are maybe coming from classics. You love classics. This one reads like a modern classic. It is so beautifully and lyrically written. It is just absolutely magic. I am obsessed with this book, and it also reads like a historical fiction, which is really nice, or historical fantasy, however you want to say. The fantasy in this, what makes this book a fantasy, is very simple. It is very much our world with a touch of magic, not any other kind of world, which makes it very easy to understand the magic system. In this book, we are following Iris Winnow, whose brother is going into war. The war is between two gods, and he gets drafted, or I can't remember if he gets drafted or if he decides to go, but regardless, he goes to war, and she uses her typewriter to send letters to him, but the letters are not getting sent to him. They are getting sent to someone who has a different typewriter through the magic system. So that is so cute. This is a rivals to lovers, like work rivals to lovers book. It is technically romantasy, I would say, but I would say it's equally romance and fantasy, so kind of take that as you will. I think these books are absolutely beautiful. And not just the covers. Read that book and you want something similar, you're going to want to read What the River Knows and Where the Library Hides by Isvanyas, who is like her real life best friend. Like, the authors are best friends, which I love. This is also a completed duology. This is going to be for fans of The Mummy. This is, I also would say, like, new adult, like a young adult could read it if they're, I would just classify this as new adult. This book, we are following Inez, whose parents are artifact hunters in Egypt, and one of them goes missing, and she is traveling to Egypt to find her parents. Obviously, things happen along the way. This is like an Egyptian heist story. This is one of the funniest books on this whole list. It is hysterical. The magic, again, is very easy to read. This reads like a historical fiction in our world with hints of magic, so that makes it very simple in regards to the magic, and it is just a phenomenal, funny read. I don't know why I'm holding up this whole series, but next I have the Red Queen series by Victoria Aveyard. This is 5 books. This is like an older fantasy. I read this in high school. This maybe is more dystopian, but there is magic in this. In this book, we're following Mare, who was born with red blood, Red Queen. Essentially, in this book, red blood means you do not have powers. Silver blood, you have powers. The people with powers are of higher class than the people with red blood because they don't have powers. So this book talks a lot about classism. But I just wanted to make sure what I'm about to say is in the synopsis so I don't spoil it. She is red blood, but she does find out she has a power. So clearly something's going on. She shouldn't have a power. She has a power. This book taught me what betrayal was in a story. I was so betrayed by what Victoria Aveyard did in this book. It still hurts me. This is a phenomenal young adult read. I read it in high school, so it's clean, it's fun, it's just everything a YA dystopian fantasy should be. The magic is, again, very introductory and super easy to follow along. And this also deals with a lot of political intrigue, which I really loved about this. It is so freaking good. I just want everyone to read these books because they're just that good. Next, this is the first book on my adult list. I just want to say this first before I recommend this. You are not going to see me recommend a lot of books by this author. She's not my favorite, but she has a great series to start your fantasy journey, and that is A Court of Thorns and Roses by Sarah J. Maas. I am unfortunately not her biggest fan. I want to love her books. I just unfortunately don't. I do, however, think this is a great introductory into the Fae world for adults. I think this book is technically young adult, but in my opinion, and let me also say I have not read Silver Flame, so I've only read the original trilogy. I don't think this should be for young adults, especially as the series goes on. Like, I guess this one is fine, but like A Court of Mist and Fury and Wings and Ruin, I think that dabbles more into adult, but I'm not going to sit here and talk about semantics. This book is a great introductory into fantasy for adults. It's very simple. The Fae are very well explained. It's great for people who are coming from romance because it is very romance driven. And I may not love the author, I may not love her other series, but this did spark my interest in reading again as an adult after I went on a little hiatus. So I have to give credit where credit's due. This is a good introductory into fantasy novel. Next, I have The Games Gods Play by Abigail Owens. This is, again, adult fantasy. This is going to be for fans of Percy Jackson. In this book, following Lyra, who is cursed by the Greek gods, and I don't want to give too much away, but basically the premise of this book is the gods have games that they play every however long, and humans play those games on behalf of the gods, and whatever human wins, that god is the ruling god for the period of time. So we have humans doing trials and games on behalf of gods. I'm not going to say how. Lyra ends up being a part of the trials, and it is just following her journey through the trials. It is very good. It is a very easy fantasy because it's just the Greek gods. We don't know much about the Greek gods to understand this book. The magic system is pretty unique and pretty fun, and there is romance in it, which makes it pretty easy to read in that sense. I would say it's about 50-50 on fantasy romance. It's not overpowering on either end, but this is a really fun read. I do want to emphasize this is an adult novel. Last book on this list, I cannot talk about fantasy without bringing this one up, and that's Earthwing by Rebecca Yarros. I love this freaking book. This book, we are following Violet. Her college, she's been training her whole life to be part of a writing group called the Scribes. Her mom makes her go into the riding quadrant, which is the dragon, like training to ride dragons and be warriors. She is not prepared, but it is just following her story, her journey through this war college. It's brutal, it's grotesque, it's romantic, it's everything. And what I love about this is it is such an easy fantasy because it's written as we would talk. It doesn't have the fantasy like complex terminology, but it is very easy to comprehend and understand. The author comes from a romance background, so the romance is chef's kiss. Probably a little bit more romance heavy than the fantasy part, but it is still really good, and I don't think it's overpowering. I will say this is unfortunately not a completed series, so take that as you will. We're on book 3 of 5, but I think these books are so good, and they are a great introductory into fantasy because they just read so easily. Okay, that was my complete beginner's guide introduction into fantasy. I would love to know what your favorite fantasy novel is, and I hope you guys all have a blessed day. Bye!